One of the most memorable moments from last season for the New Jersey Devils was beating their arch rival from across the Hudson River, the New York Rangers, in 7 games in round 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And during the regular season, the Devils had some hard-fought battles with the Rangers in that sort of aspect as well. So going into the new season, especially with the Rangers projected to be one of the top contenders in the Metropolitan Division, we definitely need to see how they fare against the Devils. And joining me on today's show is well-known NHL content creator and personality, Jonny Lazarus. So we're going to talk all things Rangers, how they fared against the Devils last season, and what are Johnny's expectations for the Rangers going into the new year. There's a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils with Jonny. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Okay, the season is fast approaching, and the past 24 hours have been somewhat interesting in the Metropolitan Division, especially with the resignation of Columbus Blue Jackets head coach Mike Babcock. But on today's episode, we're going to analyze the New Jersey Devils' arch rival from across the Hudson River, the New York Rangers. Joining me on today's show is a guy who has made quite the name for himself in the hockey world, an analyst and host for the NHL platform, a content creator for Bleacher Report, and also a full-time writer covering the Rangers for the Hockey News. Not only that, but he's the co-host of the Blue Crew podcast and a former college hockey player for the University of Massachusetts. It's Jonny Lazarus. Johnny, how you doing?
What's up, Trey? Thank you so much for the kind intro. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little afraid to be on a Devil show, but let's give it our best shot, and hopefully I don't get a lot of hate here as a Ranger guy.
Oh, don't worry. This is to just preview Devils, Rangers. So you can talk good about the Rangers all you want on my show. So don't worry about it. So Johnny, I had one of your colleagues on my show quite frequently. It's Christy Flannery, who covers the Devils for the Hockey News. So it's nice to get another writer from the Hockey News to appear on this show. But I just wanted to give a shout out for Christy for getting me in contact with you. But let's get right into it. So paint a picture for the New York Rangers' 2022-2023 season. What went right? What didn't go right? Basically, anyone who didn't follow the Rangers religiously, how did it go from your perspective?
Yeah. Also, before I do that, Christy is the best. So shout out to her. She was awesome for me in round 1, showed me around the Prudential Center, basically knew everyone in that building. So she made round 1 a lot more fun for me. But the picture I'd paint for the Rangers in 2022-23 is obviously just massive disappointment, right? Because, you bring in all this skill level and all this talent and these big names, and then you're not able to figure it out. And, I think sometimes that could be a flaw, right? So this year it could be like addition by subtraction for the Rangers. Not having Patrick Kane or Vladimir Tarasenko, just because, let's face it, those two names, as good as hockey players as they are, they could be somewhat of distractions on the ice. Like anyone who played with Patrick Kane was somewhat deferring to him. And, I don't want to say the same for Tarasenko, but I think Patrick Kane just has this name where, I think for anyone around him, you're aware that he's there, right? Like on the ice, in the room. And I'm not saying he's a distraction, but sometimes I think players often more than not defer to him. And, I think that's a little bit what happened last year. We saw it in the power play in the playoffs. The Rangers were, typically a passive power play unit, but became even more passive when Kane was out there because no one was really looking to take the shot first. They all wanted to see what play Kane would make. And, I think in the long run, I don't want to say they weren't able to click, but they didn't have that like extra oomph that the Devils had. There was no necessarily chip on their shoulder, which the Devils had. The Devils, everyone said, were playing with house money. The Rangers were the team that was expected to go all the way, and they didn't have that little extra boost that they needed to prove the world wrong, in a sense. And I think that's somewhat what went wrong. And, obviously the questions with the coach, Gerard Gallant, wasn't able to put the talent together in the proper way or put the right pieces of the puzzle together because, there were so many different line combinations that they tried and things worked, things didn't work, but nothing seemed to work consistently. And I think that was the biggest issue with last year's team was that consistent factor. And I think that's something the Rangers will look for this year. And that's something Peter Laviolette prides himself on, is being able to hold his team to a certain standard, where with Gallant, there wasn't really a standard that the Rangers had to meet. Each night you never really knew what team you'd get. You get a team that can score 6 goals, or you get a team that couldn't find the back of the net. So, I think that was an issue last year. And the biggest issue is probably consistency.
So to finish off the 2022-2023 season, the Rangers had a record of 47, 22, and 13. They finished third in the Metropolitan Division, below the Hurricanes and the Devils. What were your expectations going into the 2022-2023 season? Because obviously the Devils exceeded expectations, but I thought that the Rangers would be one of the top teams in Metro, and they were. But I don't think anyone anticipated for the Devils to have this huge surge of development, and that kind of put a hinder on like the favorites, which were the Rangers and the Hurricanes. But I just want to hear your expectations. Where did you think the Rangers would finish? What direction did you think they were going to head in?
So it's funny because I've made a lot of comparisons from the Rangers' expectations last year to the Devils' expectations for this year. I think the Rangers were a little bit ahead of what they thought would be in their rebuild by going to the conference final in 21-22. And similar to the Devils this year, I don't want to say they're a little bit ahead, but no one really expected them to make it past the first round of the playoffs. Not a lot of people even thought they would make the playoffs to begin with. So, now they're talked about as an elite cup contender where it could be a little bit ahead of expectation. And for me last year, the roster the Rangers finished with was not the roster the Rangers started with. I still had my question marks about their 5-on-5 scoring because, if you remember correctly, Jimmy Vesey was a first-line right winger last year to start the season. In what world is Vesey? And no disrespect to Vesey, but he's not necessarily a first-line NHL player.
Oh no, I totally understand. Vesey is a former Devil, so I totally understand that.
Yeah, so it's not like the Rangers were this, top to bottom flawless team last year going into the season, on paper at least. But after the deadline happened, there weren't many holes on the roster. Like the Ranger fans and Rangers and organization was looking for, another elite sniper. They got that in Vladimir Tarasenko, and they needed a second line right winger that was elite, and they got Patrick Kane. So they filled all the holes that they needed. But at the start of the year, I wouldn't have predicted the Rangers to win the division. I still won't. And I still won't predict the Devils to win the division. To me, it's still Carolina's division. They've won it, I think, 4 or 5 years in a row now, and they have not gotten worse over the years. So I don't think the Rangers or Devils should be favored over the Hurricanes to win it still. But yeah, my expectations for the last year for the Rangers was to, at least get to the second round. I'd be lying if I said I thought they would go to the conference final again. But with Igor Sorokin in goal, I thought it was possible. But I did predict actually before the season started for the Rangers to lose in the first round last year. So I am happy with that. My prediction came true, but I'm not happy that it came true at the same time because I wanted the Rangers to win, obviously.
Yeah, so come the trade deadline mid-season, the Rangers obviously were trying to compete. So what they did was they acquired Vladimir Tarasenko. Tarasenko is a player that I talked on this show quite frequently in the past because I said, despite his injuries, he could still be a serviceable player. And then they also get Patrick Kane, who is probably the best American player to ever play the game. His best years are kind of behind him, but still that could have been a serviceable player to add onto the roster. Basically, the Rangers were trying to go down swinging, and they get Tarasenko and they get Kane, but didn't really go as planned. So I want to hear your perspective on it. How did you think those trades and acquisitions went for the Rangers? What went right? What went wrong? And ultimately, Kane is still hurt, and I think he's still on the open market. Tarasenko went to the Senators. Basically, give us that perspective.
I mean, listen, I think anytime your organization goes all in and puts all their chips in the middle of the table, how could you really be upset with that? Obviously, they kind of risked the future of this team, but they were in, cap hell anyway. So it's not like had they gone a different direction, it would have been, an easy breeze this offseason. They knew they had a lot of stuff to figure out just from previous management and whatnot as well. So getting Kane and Tarasenko for what they got them for, I thought was a no-brainer. And I'll, die on that hill, because I wouldn't have changed it any other way. I know, a lot of fans might say that they would have preferred the Rangers to get a guy like Tanner Jeannot, which, in the grand scheme of things, sure, he's a grittier power forward, but is he going to be the guy that gets the Rangers to beat the Devils? No. I think playing against the Devils and losing against the Devils shows clear flaws in what the Rangers were missing. And that's, team speed and I guess overall just team defense as well, because, there were moments where the Devils had the Rangers hemmed in their own zone and the Rangers could not figure out the Devils' speed and skill. So, today's NHL has gotten much faster. The Rangers have not gotten much faster as a team. And that could be something that holds them back down the road here. But, I think you have to learn those things in order to figure out and move forward. And, I think once the Rangers do figure out their money and how they're going to spend their money and allocate all their money with the players that they currently have, I definitely believe they'll look to make this team a faster team. I think we've seen that with other teams in the past that didn't have a lot of success that found it later on, like Colorado struggled in the playoffs for years and years and years, and they found the right pieces of the puzzle and they were able to put it together and win a Stanley Cup. And I think that Colorado team had just as much, if not more, skill top to bottom than the Rangers have had in the past couple of years as well. Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, two of the top 5 players in the NHL, in my opinion, and the Rangers don't have, I'd say a top 10 player on their roster. So it's obviously a little bit different, but the Rangers, in my opinion, have 4 of the top 30 players in the league. So, I think going forward, this is a learning lesson and you got to, lose in order to win. Right. So I think when you look back on the 2022-23 NHL season for the Rangers, it's going to be a big step in the right direction, at least as far as what this team needs.
Okay, so I feel like we cannot talk about the Rangers and not talk about their goaltending. And obviously at the helm of it is Igor Sorokin. So Sorokin won the Vezina in 2022. He appeared in his first All-Star game just this past season. What can you say about Sorokin and his development as a player, and how much faith do you have in him to be the sort of the handler of just trying to take the Rangers to the next level? Because he is a phenomenal goalie. I'm not even going to debate you on that, but I just want to hear your thoughts on Igor and where he's at a player at this point in his career.
Not only is he a phenomenal player, but I think he also has that compete factor that Henrik Lundqvist had too. I think if you ask Igor Sorokin, he'd want to play in all 82 games, but obviously that's just, not what we do in today's NHL. Like you need goalies to get their rest. And, I think that was something that hindered him a little bit last year was, I think the postseason run he had the year before, maybe he just wasn't built for the longevity of doing it again. And, I'm not knocking him at all because he was phenomenal in the first round against the Devils, but his regular season was a little bit rocky. And, I think that's something this year that he's going to, have a chip on his shoulder in a sense of how he performs, just because, he wasn't happy last year with how he performed in the regular season. And listen, I think this guy, no doubt about it, top 3 NHL goalie, right? Like you can talk about Vasilevsky and Sorokin as the other two. And, I think the Rangers have a chance to win the Stanley Cup whenever Igor Shesterkin's in the blue paint. So, I don't think they're going to win the cup this year, but I would never count them out because of Igor Shesterkin. I think that's how good he is. And I do love his overall attitude to compete. And I know people knock him for, sometimes not talking to the media after a rough game, but listen, I think anyone who's played the game has been there. If you don't have your best night, the last thing you want to do is talk about it. So I'll never knock him for that. And, I know as a media member, it sucks when he doesn't want to talk, but I have a certain respect level for him that he's open and honest about the times where he doesn't want to do it. And instead of just giving lackluster BS answers to the media, he just flat out won't talk to them. And that's something that I can respect. I'm not saying all players should do it, but sometimes not saying something is also saying something. And, as far as Shesterkin goes, this guy should be an all-star yet again. He should be in the Vezina conversation yet again. And I think the Rangers can win any night that he's in goal.
Yeah, I mean, you basically just described Jack Hughes, because I remember a game in which I covered and someone tried to approach him and Jack says, "I got nothing to say to you guys." And he just walked out. I mean, I don't think Jack is trying to be a diva or anything. He just doesn't want to give, like you said, a BS kind of answer. And I think Igor Shesterkin is the same way. It can be sometimes frustrating as a media member because it's just look, we want to hear from the star player. We want to hear it from your end. But at the same time, having played sports before, I'm a former college athlete myself. You're a former college athlete. If you lose a game and someone has a camera and a mic in your face like 5 minutes afterwards, I don't think you'd be the happiest camper either, because it's just, especially if you feel like the loss was on your shoulders. So I can kind of understand it from that sort of perspective.
And let me just say one thing too, because I know this is a Devil show. Jack Hughes is my favorite person to talk to in the NHL. And I know he gets a lot of, backlash for his answers with the media sometimes, but I've gotten to know Jack pretty well now over the last 2 years. And he's my favorite player in the NHL, not only just because of his on ice, but also because of just his ability to be himself at all times. And that's something that I think is so important in today's game. And I could not literally stress enough how much I love that kid. And I just wanted to say that on the show because you brought it up. And I think, Jack obviously has his relationships with certain members of the media and, maybe isn't willing to give his full self to other people, but he's always been super nice to me. And, I feel we've built a nice relationship over the past couple of years, and he's a guy that I always look forward to talking to. And, I can't wait till the Rangers play the Devils because I'd love to get a good quote from Jack.
Wow, you're the first person to say that, because
I love the kid. I really do.
I love him too. And I always just say maybe he's just camera shy. Maybe he just doesn't want to do an interview. And I totally respect it, because I see him playing soccer in the walkway with his teammates. He's lively. He's expressive. He's cracking jokes. And then when the camera gets in his face, he sort of like mumbles. He puts his head down. He gives a look that he'd rather be anywhere else. But I always just said, like, look, he's just camera shy. He probably just doesn't like to do interviews. He's still relatively young. It's not that I don't like Jack Hughes, but I prefer to interview somebody else in the locker room, maybe like Nico Hischier, or I honestly don't mind interviewing like players that might not have a big role on the team, like Brendan Smith. Brendan Smith is a great guy to interview, and I think that translates into the locker room as well. I think you're familiar with Smith and his overall game, which isn't really all that much, but still, it's just like he's a definitely an interesting person to interview. But let's get back on track. So let's talk about before we talk about Rangers and Devils, let's talk about this offseason for the Rangers and how they're stacking up going into the new year. So they parted ways with Gerard Gallant shortly after the playoffs concluded. They bring in Peter Laviolette, and then some of the more notable offseason moves was getting Blake Wheeler. Wheeler is a two-time All-Star. Then Nick Bonino. Bonino won back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then when looking at some players you retained, you got Keandre Miller. He signed a 2-year extension. Alexis Lafreniere, he signed a 2-year extension. Basically, how did this offseason go for the Rangers? Because from my perspective, it doesn't seem like they did anything like groundbreaking. But, Bonino and Wheeler are two veteran guys that can definitely have somewhat of a decent role. And now backing up Shesterkin is Jonathan Quick, who just won another Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. So I think people are a little iffy on Quick at this point in his career. So basically, how did this offseason go for the Rangers?
I mean, they basically signed an entire beer league team at Chelsea Pier with the age and whatnot. But, I think the Rangers did what they could do with the amount of money they had to spend. I think a lot of people would say, and I'm not just saying this with Ranger bias, but Blake Wheeler could have been the steal of the offseason for what they got him at. $800K, a guy who's put up back-to-back 90-point seasons, and he'll come in and play a big role. He's been in Winnipeg now for over a decade, and I think a fresh start will be good for him. I know he's 37 years old, but, he's a guy that the Rangers can certainly use, a guy that's gritty in front of the net, a guy that plays a strong, heavy game. Is he the fastest guy in the NHL? No, but the Rangers need more physicality, and they need guys that just play an angry, heavier style. So bringing him in, I think, is great. Nick Bonino, obviously another guy, like you said, fourth line, veteran experience, has won cups. I don't think he'll have the biggest role in the team, but he'll do a lot of the little things that aren't as sexy, like similar to what Tyler Mott did. And then, Jonathan Quick, anytime you bring in a Conn Smythe winner, a guy that's, carried a team to the Stanley Cup. He just won the Cup last year with Vegas, although he didn't play as much, just to have him, in Shesterkin's ear and back him up and just, talk him through everything, right? Like Quick's a guy who's been through it all in his career. And I think it's so cool too, to have the opportunity for him to come play for his hometown team. He grew up in Connecticut and was a huge Rangers fan. So I think it's just a little bit more special for him. But they also signed a ton of other guys. Like Tyler Pillick is another one who I think will have a pretty significant impact on the team, a fourth line guy that, again, does those little things. The Rangers needed more depth and they needed more physicality. They needed more guys that play that playoff style. We saw what this team did when they had all the talent and skill in the world, and it didn't work. So now you need to kind of go in a different direction where you get all the maybe, grit and heaviness in the world and see how that goes. But I think there wasn't much that they could do this offseason, and they definitely made the most of it. But, again, I've said it a lot this summer, and I'm not really going to know what this team has until 20 games in because, I think it's going to take a bit of time for them to gel. Obviously, there is some familiarity so far on the roster, but it's a new look. So I'm really curious to see how this team comes out of the gate, especially under new staff.
Yeah, so like you said, signing older guys seems to be the niche for the Rangers the last year or so. We talked about Tarasenko, we talked about Kane, now we talked about Bonino, Wheeler, Quick. And obviously, like you said, Wheeler, Quick, and Bonino, they've achieved a lot in this league, but their better days are probably behind them. Like they're on the other side of that sort of fence. But let's talk about your expectations going into the 2023-2024 season. Where do you see the Rangers finishing in the Metro? Do you see them improving? Do you see them taking a couple steps back, or maybe staying somewhat stagnant?
So it's interesting. I feel like I go so back and forth on this. There are some days where I think the Rangers could finish fourth or fifth, and then there's other days where I think they could finish second. To me, I think it's still the Carolina Hurricanes division. Like I said before, I think they're number one. The Devils, I think, listen, I was all over the Devils last year to make the playoffs. Like I thought they were so underappreciated going into last season. But this year, and I know the moves they made, I think they might be a little bit overhyped this year. And I think that hype could creep into the room a little bit where they could finish maybe third in the division. I think with Shesterkin, the Rangers could end up being second. And it all depends on how the Pittsburgh Penguins do because they bring in Erik Karlsson. Jake Ensel's hurt to start the year, and Tristan Jarry has had some health issues over the last couple of seasons. But if the Penguins can figure it out and put it together, I could see the Penguins finishing second, which will bump back the Rangers to like third or fourth. So I think it depends on the other teams. I think the Rangers obviously control their own destiny too with Shesterkin, Fox, Panarin, and Mika. Like those are four elite talented players. But, I think there is a lot of strength in this division. So it's going to be tough. But also, under Laviolette, it's going to be interesting to see how these players adjust. And, I think Laviolette could be the right voice for them. So I'm going to say on this show, as of right now where I stand, I think the Rangers finish second. But I do think a lot of it hinders on the other teams.
So you think I guess this kind of segues into the next subject, which is previewing the Rangers and Devils. You think the Devils are somewhat overhyped, or you think they're going to crash and burn? Can you why is that your perspective?
I don't think they're going to crash and burn. I think the Devils are going to be good, but you see what happens when teams are a little bit overhyped, like just in general. And when they're underhyped in general, right? Like the Devils were playing so free and loose last year because there was no pressure on them. But now that everyone is talking about the Devils to be an elite Stanley Cup contender, if things go wrong, it's going to creep into the room a little bit. Like we've seen it happen so many times. And the same thing for the Rangers, right? Like 21-22, the Rangers weren't talked about as much. And then they go on this conference final run because, again, they're a team playing with house money, not much expectation. So I think these storylines just happen more often than not, where the Devils are an amazing team on paper. I'm not saying they're a bad team. They're probably a better team than the Rangers, I think, if you look at the roster. But when you bring in the emotional effect and the overall pressure that a lot of teams face, sometimes it just goes in a negative way. And, I've seen it happen with Colorado. I've seen it happen, I think Vegas 2 years ago doesn't even make the playoffs, and then they win the Stanley Cup the following year. Vegas was a team that was picked to win the Stanley Cup almost every season by a lot of analysts and people that cover the game because they've been a really strong team. And, things just happen in the NHL season where things go wrong and it's a, ripple effect and sometimes teams just aren't able to recover. So, I think with the success the Devils had last year, if they don't come out of the gate looking good, sometimes things can just go wrong. But I'm not saying they're a bad team. Like I think the Devils are great and they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's just having the pressure on them. I'm curious to see what they can do with it.
Well, yeah, there's always going to be pressure. I remember talking to the players about this during exit interviews, and they didn't get off to a good start last year. Like there was a push to get Lindy Ruff fired by the fan base. Like we heard the fire Lindy chants at the at the Rock early on in the year. But the one thing I could say for the Devils is that they're pretty much keeping the same band together, and they've added someone like Tyler Toffoli, but he's replacing Tomas Tatar in that sense, because Tatar was on the top 6 alongside with Hischier and Mercer. So you kind of upgrade in that regard. I think the biggest X factor for the Devils is obviously going to be the goaltending, because Vitek Vanacek, he didn't really perform all that well in the playoffs, but during the regular season, he was the first Devils goalie since Martin Brodeur to get 30-plus wins. And then you saw the rise of Akira Schmid firsthand. Like, we always knew that Akira Schmid was good, but it was finally put on a national scale. And on the defensive side of things, yes, the Devils lost Damon Severson and Ryan Graves, but the one thing I could say for the Devils is that they have some good replacements. So Luke Hughes kind of forced Ryan Graves out of town because Hughes outperformed Graves during the playoffs. And then for Damon Severson, he was going to get paid. The Devils were anticipating for him to leave, but Fitzgerald wanted to keep the band together at least for the regular season because he wanted Severson to be a part of the playoff run. And then you replace him with Colin Miller. And I think for Miller is that the less you ask out of him, the better he's going to perform. He was playing top line minutes with the Stars, and for the Devils, he's going to be used as a bottom 4 defenseman. And then then you got to look at Shimon Nemeth. So I know there's going to be more pressure. The Devils had a historic season. They broke the franchise record for most wins, which was 52. Can they get 53 wins? Probably unlikely. But even if they get like anywhere from 40 to 50 wins and are still in the playoff hunt and are still like one of the top teams in the Metro, then I don't think it's them taking a step backwards. It's just really hard to overcome a historic season. Like, just ask the Boston Bruins. They broke the record for most wins and most points in a regular season. And then obviously they lost their longtime player in Patrice Bergeron. But so I can't speak for the Boston Bruins and how they're going to improve. But I think for the Devils, like, I get it that they're the talk of the town in the Metro, but I think the window is just opening for Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and Timo Meyer is finally going to be given a full 82-game season to suit up in a Devils sweater. So I get what you're saying, but at the same time,
I'm not disagreeing with you. Like, the Devils got better. Like, I'm not saying they're a bad team at all. I'm just saying,
No, and I didn't say you thought they were a bad team. I just said, like, I get it. Like, it's hard to eclipse a historic season.
Yeah.
But I still think they're going to be one of the top teams in the Metro because of their age, how they play the game, and the skill that they were able to retain and also upgrade with.
I'm just saying, I guess, from like the overall landscape, like, how often is a team talked about as an elite Stanley Cup contender when, years before they weren't even knocking on the door of the playoffs and they win one game in the second round, and now all of a sudden they're the sexy pick to win the cup, right? That's just what they are. They are the sexy pick. And I'm all for it because I love watching the Devils play. I just told you Jack Hughes is my favorite player in the league. And I'm a Ranger guy. Like,
right.
I'm not just saying that.
Right.
But I think, like, all these teams that have won the cup in recent years, they've all been knocking on the door years prior to that, right? Like, I know Vegas missed the playoffs the year before they won, but they were a team that was in conference finals. They've had experience. They've been there and done it. Colorado Avalanche, they were knocking on the door. They've been there. They just couldn't find a way to get over the hump. The Devils are just now arriving. So I think to call them a cup contender is just a little bit of an overhype. But again, I think they're going to be really good, and it won't surprise me if they go far. But to sit here and talk about a team that made their first postseason in like 5 years and won one game in the second round, and to have them be the Stanley Cup contender, I think that's just a little bit of an overhype. And if I'm a Devils fan, I wouldn't want the hype. Being an underdog is so much better for your team.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the window is just opening. So even if they're not cup contenders this year, I think if they still have somewhat of a successful season, you would still pick them next year because
1,000%.
Yeah,
1,000%.
Yeah, when I'm looking at like some of the favorites, one news source said that the Devils could go back to back in 2025, 2026, something like that, because I think the favorites out of the Metro are obviously the Hurricanes. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and you're absolutely right in that sense because experience does play a huge factor for the Devils. But the one thing I could just say is, like, even if they're not going to be favorites this year, or even if they don't like make it far in the playoffs, they still got next year, the year after.
Yeah.
that.
Oh my God. They're going to be amazing for 10 years.
Right. Their core is still together. And that's why you bring in someone like Tyler Toffoli, who's won before. Eric Halla, he's made deep playoff runs before. So the experience, and now Jack Hughes finally know what it's like to play after an 82-game season and not go straight home to the Bahamas after the season is over. They now have that experience under their belt. But the big question is, like, how are the goaltenders going to fare? And we're just going to have to wait and see. Don't worry, there's still more in store with Jonny. But before we continue, I want to tell you guys about Bird Dogs, because summer might be over, but you still need to look good and you need some breathable material for your body. So Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you can get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink, sweat, wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Bird Dogs are functional for any occasion, whether you're golfing, out on a date with that special someone, evening out, pool, workout, you name it. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs, I promise you. And now, let me tell you guys about a product I use literally every day. So I started taking AG1 because I wanted to be happier. I wanted to be healthier. My body's a temple. I got to start treating it as such. I drink it in the morning before I go work out, before I record an episode, because I have that nutritional supplement in my body. So AG1 is a foundational nutrient supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health. AG1 replaces your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple drinkable habit. Source-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food source nutrients. AG1 is raising the standard for quality in the supplement category. AG1 helps you build your health foundational first. So all great athletes have one thing in common. They take care of their bodies, and you need to start doing so too with AG1. Trust me, I've never been more healthy or happier when I go to the gym or whatever the case might be. So if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplemental routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out. All right, let's get back to our discussion with Jonny as we talk more about the Rangers and Devils. Take it away once again. Like I said, this kind of segues into the next subject. I know we both went on a bit of a tangent, but let's talk Devils, Rangers, and how that went last year, because they gave us some memorable matchups. So first game the Devils played against the Rangers was in late November. Devils came out victorious by a score of 5-3 at Madison Square Garden. Then in early December, Devils, I believe, took the Rangers to overtime. They came out on the losing end, 4-3. Then this was one of my favorite games to be at the Prudential Center for and to cover. And this was when Jack Hughes went absolutely bananas. January 7th, Devils win 4-3. Then March 30th, I would say it was sort of a statement victory for the Devils once again. They came out victorious by a score of 2-1. So the Devils, they never lost in regulation to the Rangers until the playoffs. So before we talk about the playoffs, and I guess you already gave your sense of version of it, what did you think of the Rangers when they were playing against the Devils?
I mean, the Devils scared the crap out of me all year. I was pretty open about that on social media and whatnot. And, I think it was interesting. The first couple of games, I believe the team that took a 2-0 lead off the bat ended up losing. I think it was the Rangers first, the Devils second. When the Devils won 5-3, I think the Rangers had an early 2-0 lead in that game at the Garden. And then, I think the same thing the next time when the Rangers won and Hughes scored that overtime goal, the Devils had a 2-0 lead. So that was interesting. But, the Devils are built better. The Devils are a team where, right now, if I'm picked to say who's winning this game tonight, Rangers Devils, I'm probably taking the Devils 9 out of 10 times. But I guess as far as the regular season goes, like going into this year, or are we still talking about last year?
We're talking about last year. We'll get into this upcoming year momentarily.
Yeah, I mean, those games were fun as hell, right? Like, they put on a show for Rangers and Devils fans, I think, every time they met, and that's the expectation, I think, this year too. But, I mean, there's the only game I don't remember that March 30th game you referenced, I don't really remember that one.
Yeah, so Devils came out victorious by a score of 2-1, and that was at the Prudential Center. It was late in the year, so at that point, we knew like what was going to happen. Both teams were going to make the playoffs, and that was a game in which Eric Hollis scored, Timo Meyer scored, Chris Kreider scored. So I'd say on the Devils' end, that was definitely a good preview for the playoffs because it gave the Devils some hope. Because I believe at this point, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, I think it was solidified that the Devils would take on, or it was pretty much guaranteed that the Devils would take on the Rangers because too many factors would have had to go the Devils' way in order for them to get the first seed in the Metro. So I think, so I'd say that was definitely a good preview for the playoffs. But yeah, but it was late in the year. We both knew the Rangers and Devils were going to make the playoffs, which I guess now we go into the playoffs, in which the Rangers jumped out to a 2-0 lead. They swiped 2 games at the Prudential Center. Then the Devils go to Madison Square Garden. They swipe 2 games themselves. It's basically anyone's game. Series is tied 2-2. And then Devils win game 5. Rangers win game 6. And then the 2 most famous words in sports, game 7 at the Prudential Center. And the Devils win their first playoff series since 2012 and go on to the second round. But let's just talk about that series in general. So, like I said, Rangers swiped 2. They absolutely put the hammer down on Vitek Vanacek. Their power play led by Chris Kreider was really good. And they win back-to-back games 5-1. And then going to the Madison Square Garden, Dougie Hamilton had an OT game-winning goal. That gave the Devils their first playoff win since 2018. Then the Devils win 3-1 in game 4 at Madison Square Garden. And basically the reset button has been hit. Then game 5, Devils shut out the Rangers 4-0. And then game 6, it seemed like the Rangers figured out Akira Schmid a little bit. Devils didn't have their best outing. Then game 7, Akira Schmid shut out the Rangers once again, 4-0. Devils advance. So, Johnny, how did that series go from your end? And like basically, what was like the mindset after this 7-game series?
Well, it's funny. I talked about it with Dan Rosen from the NHL after game 7. And, a lot of the story, I think, was the Rangers collapsing, after having a 2-0 lead in the series. That was what people were kind of running with. But, when we talked about it, I think the interesting perspective was not the Rangers collapsing, but it was where the hell were the Devils in game 1 and game 2? Like the Devils that we saw from games 3 to 7 was the Devil team we saw all year long. So, I think it was interesting. I guess maybe the playoff jitters kind of got to them in games 1 and games 2, but game 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 was the Devil team I watched all year. So, I think it wasn't necessarily the Rangers, lacking. Of course they couldn't score goals, and their power play struggled in the games they lost. And that was an interesting stat, was in all 4 games the Rangers lost in that series, they didn't score a power play goal. And in all 3 games they won, they did score a power play goal. So the Rangers kind of fed off their power play a little bit. But the Devils, I thought, were going to be in way more control than they were, obviously, in games 1 and games 2. So that was a bit of a surprise. And maybe, I think a lot of people talked about experience versus non-experience in the series early on, and it showed in game 1 and game 2. But for whatever reason, the Rangers just, couldn't figure the Devils out in the back half of the series. And I think that was the case in the regular season also. The Devils were the more dominant team when they met in the regular season. And, I think a lot of people thought that would carry into the playoffs. And it's funny because, as much as the hype was around the Rangers in the playoffs, the Devils were still favored in the series by, most books and whatnot. So, it was interesting to see how it played out. But I think the storyline was more so the Devils just finally finding their game, as the series went on, as opposed to the Rangers collapsing. And of course the Rangers did not, play to their best, but that's like credit to the Devils, because the Devils kind of shut them down and didn't let them. The Devils brought their game to the Rangers. So, obviously very disappointing for the Rangers side of this series and very encouraging for the Devils side. But when you look back on that series, like the Rangers had no business being up 2-0 going home if the Devils, bring their best effort in games 1 and games 2. And then it's a totally different storyline. And then on the flip side, if the Rangers find a way to score a goal in overtime in game 3, like who the hell knows what happens? Like maybe Gerard Gallant still has his job. Maybe the Rangers beat Carolina. Like, it's a huge what if, right? Because a 3-0 lead in a series is almost a stranglehold as opposed to 2-0, especially when that game 4 is on home ice. So obviously it's a huge what if, and, we'll never know. But the Devils, clearly were the team that was built better last year, and I think they're built a little bit better this year as well. But, you never know with playoff hockey, man. It can always go either way.
So obviously I'm sure there's a lot of factors to this, and Shesterkin, he didn't really have his best outing in the playoffs. I'm sure there were a few goals that he would have liked to have back. But is it safe to say that something was getting into Shesterkin's head a little bit? Because it seemed like Timo Meyer irked him a bit, because Meyer didn't have a single point during round 1. But the one thing I liked from Meyer, he was playing physical, he was playing aggressive, and this was actually one of the biggest headlines during the playoffs, which was the quote-unquote battle between Shesterkin and Meyer, because it seemed like Meyer was getting into his head just a tad bit, and then ultimately Meyer paid the price in Game 7 by taking a big hit from Jacob Trouba, which knocked him out for Game 1 against the Hurricanes. But yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, on how Shesterkin played, and just I guess the overall execution by the Rangers in that series.
I'm actually looking for my tweet because I think I tweeted out Timo Meyer's name probably 100 times in that series. And I'm trying to find the exact way I worded it, but I think I tweeted out that Timo Meyer might be the most effective player in the history of an NHL series to never record a point. Like if you asked me and I watched that series, every game in and out, I would have told you that Meyer had probably 7 points in 7 games because of how effective he was. But, he left his mark all over the Rangers. Trouba, was obviously getting a little pissed at him. Like you said, Igor was obviously getting pissed at him. He was just getting under the skin of everybody. And, he had a lot of scoring chances too. I'm trying to find this tweet. I can't find it. But yeah, no, I was tweeting out Timo Meyer basically the entire time and just talking about how incredible I thought he played. Oh, here it is. I got it right here. I tweeted out on May 2nd, so I'm not sure which game that was, but I said, has there ever been a more effective player in a series that had 0 points other than Timo Meyer? He was literally just all over it. And credit to him because, I think that's why the Devils brought him here. He's a guy that can be gritty and play 200 feet of the ice and play physical and also put up 40 goals. He does it all. And I think he's going to be a huge difference maker for the Devils this season. And, clearly, like you said, he got under Shesterkin's skin. And, it's crazy to see the effect that Meyer had without having a single point. I've never seen anything like it. And, I guess it just goes to show how effective he can be in all assets of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a big storyline going into next season, and all for it. So obviously the Rangers and Devils are going to see a lot of each other during the course of this upcoming season. So to close things out, Jonny, tell me your expectations for the Rangers and Devils going into the new year. And is Zibanejad, Kreider, are all those guys, Shesterkin, are they going to give the Devils some trouble when the regular season approaches?
Listen, I think these two teams are going to have some unbelievable battles this year. Do I know where the Rangers shape up right now against the Devils? No, because I'm curious to see how they play under Laviolette. I'm sure they're going to come out with a lot more fire than they did last year under Gallant. But I think obviously, anytime you talk about Zibanejad, Fox, Panarin, they're going to give any team trouble. But the Devils have always found a way to have an answer for them. So I can't wait for that first matchup. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of animosity. And, I'm curious to see what Jack Hughes has up his sleeve, what Timo Meyer can do, how he can affect the game. And, it's going to be a lot of fun. So, I don't really have a prediction or anything of some sorts, but I know that they're going to give us some good battles, and I can't wait for it.
So this is a rhetorical question, but am I presume that there's still bad blood between both these organizations?
I think there always will be, no matter what. It's funny. I think you started out the show by saying that the Rangers are the Devils' biggest rival. And I've always said the Devils the Rangers' biggest rival, but for whatever reason, some people on our end don't think so. But I think if last year's playoff series taught us anything, it's that this rivalry is definitely renewed.
All righty now, Jonny. So where can my audience find you at?
You can just follow me on X Jay Lazzy 23, and I do a lot of work with a bunch of different companies, like you stated. I do a lot of content with Bleacher Report. I actually did an interview with Jack for Bleacher Report, which will be coming out relatively soon, I think, and that was a lot of fun. So I'm sure Devil fans will like that one. But just pretty much on Twitter, Instagram, Jonny Lazarus, and that's about it. But Trey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and it's going to be a fun year of Ranger Devils battles.
Absolutely. Hope to have you back on the show at some point in the future. And like I did to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Check out Johnny's work for NHL, the Hockey News, Bleacher Report, and a few others. Johnny, the pleasure is always mine, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.